welcome to our third L&D Community of Practice workshop in our Business Culture and Other Short Stories series. And obviously, as I've said in the last two sessions, business culture is not a short story. So my name is Kerry Smalley. I'm the Marketing Director at Stellenbosch Business School Executive Development. And thank you so much for being here. I was hoping there'd be a few more, but hopefully they're still coming. And can you believe that this is the last session, and it's October, and in 2 months' time it'll be Christmas. So the last session focuses on this mystical sort of holy grail of, I think, what influences everything that you do, that we do, and that is really return on learning with a twist. So we call it return on learning debunked. That's the title of this workshop. And debunked speaks to poking holes in something. It speaks to finding falseness in something. And absolutely, that is not what we're trying to do here today.
Welcome.
We're definitely not trying to poke holes in return on learning. But I think what it speaks to for us here today is that it's about understanding it better. Okay? It's about understanding that it takes different forms, that it depends on the context of the organization. And there isn't the silver bullet. So sorry, if everyone was expecting a silver bullet of return on learning, I'm really sorry. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. I know, refund. So, there isn't a one-size-fits-all, much like culture, okay? So if I go back to Niven Posma's session in June in Joburg, she was speaking all about business culture and then learning culture as a subset of business culture. And then, that's it. Culture isn't a one-size-fits-all, okay? And similarly, going back to Prof. Willem Foury's session in August, some of you were here, that session focused on embedding learning into culture, okay? And again, that spoke a lot to leadership and how leadership impacts how return on learning, the process of return on learning, how it's implemented, how it's bought into by everyone else. That's what today's session is about. It's about understanding that return on learning is not this simple, thing that you can apply to everything. Anyway, so before I hand over to Chris and San-Ullah, I just wanted my colleague Marie to come up because we actually, while we've got you here, we're going to use you for some research. So, I blame her. So it's a very short Mentimeter. So please bring out your cell phones and then be prepared to put them back in your bags. Okay.
A hearty welcome from my side as well. I'm the business developer at Stellenbosch Business School Executive Development, still getting used to that name. So as you know, it's not USB Ed anymore, but SBS Ed. So today we're going to hear about ROI, or I like to call it ROLI. Return on learning investment. And we know that's important to you, but we would also like to know what other factors are important to you when you decide on your learning partners. So we've prepared this anonymous quick sticks Mentimeter. There's 8 questions. And if you can just answer it for us, the results, as I mentioned, it's anonymous, and we will just use it to see what is important to you, and it might even perhaps inform our next L&D Community of Practice session so that we just have some interaction with our audience as well before we start. And I'll give you a few minutes and then we'll close the Mentimeter. So my colleague in Johannesburg is actually managing it for me, so I'll go and check on the WhatsApp. I can actually see how many people will be answering. So we'll sit here until everybody has responded. Thank you.
It's like little brother, not big brother.
So while we're doing this, and before we start, I really wanted to thank you, San-Ullah. So we have San-Ullah Bray, the group head of HR from Sanlam here, who is very bravely co-facilitating with our CEO, Chris van der Hoven, and will also give us some insights as to the return on learning process at Sanlam. So San-Ullah, thank you so much. I know it's a very busy time of year, and also thank you to you for joining us today. So in terms of my boss, since June 2018, Dr. Chris van der Hoven, our CEO at ED, we are really lucky in that at ED, in that Chris holds the line between academia and business. consulting and engaging with both of these worlds across the globe, while still remaining proudly African. So, Chris.
Thank you. A very warm welcome to all of you. We actually, we had quite a lot, you can see from the name tags outside, we had quite a lot of people said they were going to come, and we were very excited about that. But let's just say we're a small but very well-formed group as a result of a couple of people. By the way, having driven through the traffic this morning, I completely understand why people could come 2/3 of the way and go, okay, enough. Just, I need to declare my hand. There's a constant sort of attrition that goes on between myself and marketing, and one of this kind of demonstrates one of those things, is that I accused Kerry of having a title for this session, which I think is clickbait. It is. Because I personally don't think we should be trying to debunk the idea of it. But then we had a meeting, myself and Trish, who's sitting there, who's our commercial director, and Kerry. San-Ullah very kindly hosted us in his offices. And we had a chat about it, and we came away, and we had Ravika, who San-Ullah might talk about a little bit later, talk about the way they go about doing things. And it occurred to me that actually not everybody is as left brain and nerdy as I am about how these things are done. So to some extent, actually, there is a little bit of debunking of what we think the ideal sort of theoretical view is of return on learning. But let me start by asking you this before I say a word about San-Ullah and his role. How many of you are responsible for making decisions about development spend in your organization? Okay, a few. And I'm assuming the rest of you have an influence or an interest in that kind of domain, and so we are on safe ground, so to speak. The question that I would have for all of you that do have a particular need to be able to motivate for development in the organization is whether you find yourselves in a situation where you are competing for resource with other departments like marketing or HR or et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that's where this is important, is that if it was the case that there's plenty of money sloshing around in the system and we can spend as much as we like on development, of course we're going to spend a lot on development because we like looking after our people, and we have an instinctive notion that if we develop our people, the business will be better, they will feel bought into, there's an intrinsic motivational element around that, and so on. It's only when money is tight that being able to actually quantify the investment that we make in learning becomes an issue. So what I want to do is to just acknowledge the way, the approach that gets taken, probably more often than not, because it's the quickest, most sensible route to market, if I can call it that, versus if things are really tight and difficult, are there things we can do and tools we can use to try and be a bit more forensic and scientific, so that when we're talking to the CAs and the actuaries and the et cetera, we have ammunition that we can use that is legitimately going to allow us to compete for resource. So I'm going to take you through a quick set of approaches to evaluating learning as a starting point. And we might do a quick exercise to just get the conversation going, if you don't mind. So I might ask you to pair up with somebody else. Post-COVID, that's an exciting prospect. That was for your benefit, Jacques, just so we're clear. Keep Dion's line straight on how does Jacques operate. And then I'm going to ask San-Ullah. He's got a couple of bits and pieces that he would like to share with you, depending on how the conversation goes. So let me just step back a moment and just introduce San-Ullah properly. So first of all, we have I hope I'm not taking any liberties here, but we have a shared mentor in the recently deceased Desmond Smith, who was the CEO and then subsequently the chairman of Sanlam. But San-Ullah knew him from way back. So San-Ullah entered Santam initially in 2004 and moved across to Sanlam in 2011, and has had a role pretty much throughout that has been on the excos of both of those organizations. So has had very senior roles, and then more recently has taken over the role as the group executive, sitting on the group executive committee at Sanlam, but the group executive responsible for human capital. And our relationship with Sanlam goes back a very long way, partly because of Desmond, and by that I mean 2 and a bit decades, which is when the business school was refined, if I can call it that. So the business school used to do both degree programs and executive development programs, which is what we focus on. So development programs are short courses, like a management development program is a short course, 9 months. It's not a degree program, it's a certificate program. And they, at that stage, a couple of business people got around the table. One of the representatives was someone from Sanlam. And they recruited the great and the good from Stellenbosch University and said, you guys, we need an outfit which is commercially ring-fenced, effectively a PTY limited company that is going to drive this process efficiently and, by the way, generate revenues and surpluses that can be fed back into the degree programs and research part of the business school. So where we make a surplus, we do have some third-party shareholders, but the surpluses go back into the university and they are deployed for the most part in order to fund research, which government and other sort of competing environments don't provide funding for the business school. So your hard-earned money ends up in our coffers if you spend it on development, and whatever's a surplus to that gets fed back into the business school in order to do research. And the idea is it's a kind of virtuous circle. I mention all of this just because there was, so is anybody here from Woolworths? Yeah. So I'm so sorry, I should know your name, but I don't. What's your name, please? Sumaya. So for example, Woolworths was also part of that original discussion, and to this day, the chairman of the advisory board is a gentleman called Simon Suzman, and Simon was until recently the chairman of Woolworths as well. So we have this network. It's a very, how would I describe it? It's a very sort of long-lasting set of relationships. And it kind of dictates a little bit how we operate today, trying to build relationships with people that are deep and long-standing relationships. So that's kind of how that came about. And the relationship with Sanlam is one of those. Just by the way, I said, so we've got a lady here called Christina Swartz, who's from Old Mutual. I'm going to stand between you and San-Ullah for a second. And I said to Christina that, we've got these relationships that go back a very, very long time. And one of the things that's a benefit of something like that is that during COVID, the university had to dip its hand in its pocket to make sure that as a little business we could survive. But it was also companies like these and like Woolies that continue, and TFG, that continue to support us in that time. Basically kept sending people, and in some cases bulked up some of the classes that we ran in order to make sure we could get across the line. And we did. So, okay, so let me get into this. I hope I haven't yeah. The other liberty I might take, by the way, is I like to think that we are friends, but I'll find out I'll find out when things go wrong whether or not that's true. But San-Ullah, just by the way, I'm so grateful to you for being here, because it's I know you're very busy, so yeah. All right, good. So here we go. So just what I'm going to do is just show you a couple of things that people tend to measure when it comes to learning. Okay, so the first thing is, did delegates enjoy the intervention? Easy to measure, right? We could do a Mentimeter, or we could hand out a sheet of paper that says, what score do you give the workshop for whatever did you enjoy it, yes or no? Okay. Did they learn anything? Not obvious from the sheets you give to your delegates. Did they actually learn anything? Even, by the way, even if you ask them, there's a recency bias. It's a classic research issue, which is basically what happens is you ask them and they play back to you what they've heard most recently. Yes, I learned about Porter's 5 forces, and I learned about the 4 Ps, and I learned about 6 or 10 or however many there are now, etc. And they basically play back what they've heard most recently. Same in advertising. If people are asked about the gadgets that they use, they play back what Apple told them in the advertising. It's a recency bias. But nevertheless, it is important. More important maybe, did people's behavior change? So that's a bit more tricky, but if you think about it, it starts to test you, to ask you the question about why are you doing this? Why are your delegates in the room with faculty from Stellenbosch Business School? And the answer should be something in the region of we're trying to change certain behaviors. What behaviors? Okay, so there's some questions there. If we get the behaviors sorted out, level 3, can we measure some kind of impact on the business? Okay, now we're getting into really tricky territory. And then, of course, if that's the case, do we know whether it moves the dial? So does it mean that as a business we perform better because our people have been sent to these development interventions? Now, before I go to the last part here, let me just tell you that I have been in many meetings over literally decades where somebody who's a newly minted L&D professional will proudly beat their chest and go, you tell me what the return on investment is from our learning. And when I started out in this business, I was very seduced by the opportunity to go down the rabbit hole of, well, let me tell you about how it all works. Until I realized that actually part of the problem is people really don't understand, or they've never thought about it before. And now if I'm in a meeting like that, I'm more likely to just take a step back. Because if we are in a situation where people are saying, you tell me what the return on learning is, I can explain a process and I can explain a couple of ways to go about doing it, but I have no idea. I'm not in that business. We have something called a client promise, which turns everything inside out. We talk about co-developing with our clients interventions for their staff that helps them to operationalize and communicate their strategy, that helps them to refresh their culture, that helps them to take inspiration in the future of the organization, etc. There's a couple of different bits and pieces. All of that is about a return on learning, but it's also telling you a story about how we go about doing what we do. And that story is, we do not presume to know your business. We work with you to try and make sure that we can move all of those metrics, if I can call it that, with you. All right, so return on investment. And as I say, the tricky thing about this is if you're an exec in a business and people say, why is it that you want that proportion of funding? Where's the business case? Then whether you like the number side of it or not, that's the game you're in. And then the last bit is level 6, is there a supportive learning culture? Now, I personally think that in South Africa in the last 5 to 10 years, this has become something that's become way better than it ever was. It's as L&D and human capital professionals have moved their bar up, if I can call it that, so this has become much more the case, but there's still a lot to be done there. So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to, in fact, let me skip, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip 2 slides ahead here and just ask you to do a quick exercise.
Okay, I wasn't hoping you'll start with me. But okay, so we've basically spent most of the time on level 3 in particular.
Yeah, that's all right. No, that's fine.
And I think the reason is because I come from private, he comes from the public sector. So
Yes.
It was a bit of, the public sector doesn't really look at return on investment in the group terms that many of us would do in the
Yes.
monetary term. They look at more of the capabilities approach.
Yes.
So what we looked at was how do we then look at the behavior? Of course, to sum it up is in terms of we've got an intervention. So obviously we identify that this is where we are in terms of skills.
Yeah.
And we then have an intervention with the hope that behavior would then change after the intervention. So it's more of a pre and post kind of analysis and evaluation.
So did you get to the, you might not have had enough time, but did you get to the point where you're talking about the how? In other words, how do you know? I mean, how do you know if you invest in me, if I work for Lewis or you invest in me, how do you know that my behavior has changed?
Well, we didn't get to that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, I gave you a gap there so you could escape if it was. No, well done. That's a good start for us. Okay, somebody else, please. Just a completely random. Yes, please.
Part of our discussions centered also around what happens when the behavior doesn't change.
Yes.
Which.
Conversation's not recorded.
And then we said, if you look at level 6,
Yes.
the issue of creating probably an enabling environment for those that attend training
Yeah.
to go back to the environment and be able to learn. But also more broadly, the learning culture that you talk about, because it doesn't help to invest on people, but when they get back to their institution, the culture is not conducive, but there is basically no space at all for them to learn. But over and above that, there are also other factors that you need to take into account, including the attitudes. So when you train, you need to have a much more holistic understanding of those that you're training, because you may want to change a particular one when there are preconditions that you would have to deal with.
So you make a distinction. So first of all, by the way, I like very much the distinction between capability and any other measures we might have, because that does link to behavior, so I'm 100% with you. But do you make a distinction between, and I'm gonna come over here because this young lady was just about jumping out of her skin while you were talking, and I know she wants to say something. But do you make a distinction between the culture inside the learning environment and the culture back at work, or are you talking more the culture back at work?
It's more the culture back at work.
At work, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Right. Over to you.
Yeah, so I think I wasn't actually going to comment. I was actually saying something, but I'm going to go for it. I think I'm quite loud. But for us, in our conversation, it was that when you look at people's behavior, so firstly, you would have identified this as a result of. So me going into the business would say that I've got a problem. People don't do this. I need training, because that's the solution, you know. I need training. Please train my people and make them better. And then we come up and we whip our magic wand and we're like, they're better, go. Yeah. But okay, it doesn't quite work like that. But firstly, why is it? What have you identified that is not? And if it is that the reason why they're not doing this is not necessarily a knowledge gap. It might be a behavior thing, but why is the behavior the way it is? So there's a tangible thing, a result that the business have identified.
Yes.
But through our analysis and our conversation and our root cause, we understand that the behavior is resulting in, say, for example, low productivity, or it's resulting in the quality not looking good, or etc. So that will become the tangible measure that we would look at. And we would say that if this behavior would change, then this result would increase, or this thing would look different. So now we say, okay, so our solution to this thing after the analysis, we think that we're going to do this solution and we're going to have this type of intervention. That intervention would then, in our mind, change this behavior, which will then result in an increase in productivity or whatever tangible thing that the business initially saw. Because their thing was we just see this problem, but that's where we kind of partner together.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because it's related. So if I am the person who allocates funds for different things, and you come and you make that argument, and I say, no, all I'm going to do is I'll put Claire on top of that team, and I guarantee you the productivity will go up. By the way, this is not a false story, this is how it actually works. And you then have to defend, but hold on a second, it is as much about the people as it is about the leadership. How do you deal with that?
I think for me, the immediate response, without having to think about it, my immediate response to that would be, how sustainable is that?
Okay.
And how sustainable is it to put Claire there? So if that department is not working, I'm going to take Claire and put Claire there, and then we're going to put Claire there. Yeah. So how do we influence the culture? Because if we have this thing happening and it works really well, then we take it to the next team, because then we can prove that. So I would build my case around the sustainability of having a one person kind of fixing the problem. So that is like plastering it. But if we want to go root cause and we want to go deep dive into it and fix it, then we would say let's deal with the root cause of it and not just plaster it with a clay.
Okay. So no clear plastering. Okay, we've got it. Okay, somebody else with a different. What were your thoughts, you guys, you and Vernon?
We spoke quite a bit around impact on the business. So, just discussions around if you understand and you define adequately what the impact is, it's easier to determine what the return is, and it's easier to see from a supportive learning culture. You can see if it's demonstrated. Is there budget for it, or is it reallocated? As I was saying, that's usually my experience. Oh, no, we need to reallocate the spend. Yeah. So if there is budget there, does it get spent? Is it celebrated? Is it, so you can get evidence of that. But we just spoke quite a bit around the impact on the business. How do you actually define that? And how do you directly correlate the intervention? Because there could be many other factors that could result in an increase in turnover, an increase in productivity, etc. And when one is competing for finances or for funding, that's where it can become very sticky. Because how do you define what that impact is? And being a bean counter myself, we don't want to...
So I was being rude and I didn't even... Okay.
Don't worry. It's all good.
I've been rumbled.
I chose to be here today. It's a choice, active choice. But it's about, so I don't want to hear about this touchy-feely stuff. What's going on? How do we actually measure the impact?
Yes.
And so we had a really good conversation about, what is the value? Because value can be defined in more than just monetary terms. And that's where the conversation can be shifted.
Yeah, so impact relates to this point, by the way, which is, so first of all, what's the impact? And then secondly, what proportion of impact comes from where? So is it about a change in leadership, a change in systems maybe, a change in policies and approach, a change in, or is it the actual development? And what proportion and what level of confidence do we have that that's actually the contributing factor? So you see I'm already slipping into a left brain mode. So I think that's definitely, that moves us forward. Christina, what did you think?
So for me, it was difficult to bucket it because I don't know if it should follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just to bring a different thinking into the room. Because sometimes you can't measure the person's behavior immediately. It takes a period of time, or it takes some people change quicker than others. You may be able to measure the business impact quicker than you can measure the behavior change of the individual. So just to bring that thought into the room. I also think, so it becomes quite iterative. So it's not maybe a stagnant 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be quite iterative. And it could be when you consult with the business up front, they say, listen, I don't need you to measure this. I actually just need this amount to change. So I might not necessarily spend time on the other levels because the business directive is to focus on one thing. The other point is when we say the person's behavior needs to change, we have to be clear on what good looks like. So if we say it's Kate, okay, so what does Kate do that is different from what John's doing? Mm-hmm. And actually document it. We were also talking about how do you measure it, because behavior is something that can be quite subjective, not necessarily very objective. So you might have a mentor or leader that needs to give additional input for the holistic, because behavior is not just in a portion of your day, it's who you are and how you show up at work.
Yeah.
So that's just some thoughts. I do have more, but I do not want to rob other people of an opportunity.
No, that's very helpful.
Weigh in.
That's very helpful. Okay, good. Some other thoughts, different thoughts. Jacques.
So we were starting with behavior, and things that came up was engagement, and eventually into style of leadership and those kind of things. And I often get asked, from my perspective, what's the return on the investment in terms of coaching programs? Mm-hmm. And that is because behavior and coaching is so much related. And very difficult. One thing that came up was decision making, how to fast track decision making, and how personalities influence the timing of the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be very difficult. And if I apply sequence to that, it might be necessary to move level 6 before level 3 and first create a supportive learning environment, a learning culture, before you try and change behavior. Because if it's not supported, if learning is not supported, the behavior won't change.
Yeah, 100%.
And then you go on and say, right, now what can we do to, if it's coaching or training or mentoring, whatever it is, then you start changing the behavior and continue with the rest.
Very good. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Right, who have we not heard from? What about you guys? What did you think?
Yeah, it was very similar to what the group has said at the back as well. Oh, gosh, okay. No. It's similar to what the group has shared. I think if we, and you asked the question earlier on how do we measure it, what type of measures are put in place in the organization. If we look at our performance management system, that is a continuous process of improvement. And
so there's a relationship between the return on learning and the performance management.
Absolutely, because that relates back to skills development, talent management, all of those buckets. But if I look at all of this holistically, it influences the business culture. Everything that you do in terms of influencing that behavioral change is going to influence that business culture.
100%.
Because earlier on, I'm sitting here in an organization of our size of 30-odd thousand and many other organizations, you get buckets of what good looks like. You're never going to get that perfect science for every leader to look exactly the same. But your values should align, should be the almost like the spine of how everybody should align to that.
Yes.
Because we are all authentically ourselves and how we show up as leaders to support people in an organization. So it is a myriad of things, and when I look at that, it's like you can go down in a rabbit hole with each of those elements, and it all touches each other.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, one of the things which I think our first colleagues there alluded to is just the risk is you do what is simplest. It's like, you've lost your keys on a dark street somewhere and there's only one street light, so you go and look where there's light, because obviously then you could, but the keys could be anywhere, So it's we get channeled. So whatever's easiest, we go after that. And unfortunately, what's easiest is we just literally, we poll the delegates on the day. Say, how did you feel about this? Did you enjoy it? Do you think you've learned something new? Will your behaviors change as a result? And we do a lot of leveraging off that outcome. So can I ask you whether you've done learning and development interventions for anything other than one of these things? I mean, directly. Like, in other words, the purest view of the world would be to say, this is because of our performance requirements, and this is because of our succession plan. So we're doing development in order to move people along in some of those fields. But sometimes there might be other reasons that you do development interventions. Can you think of any?
Probably compulsory learning, like required.
Compliance? Yeah. Yeah, so... How does that work?
So if you consider like an ADCAR model where knowledge and ability come into a more comprehensive change management process.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you. What I had in mind is that we've had a lot of experience, and that's why we say that I made the point earlier about learning interventions that are co-designed, that are intended to help communicate or operationalize a strategy, or touch the hearts and minds of people that you care about, clients, staff, vendors, whoever that is, etc. In our client promise, that's kind of what, because we know that sometimes the sort of measurable outcome is not obvious. So a classic example is if an organization is downsized and you want to demonstrate to the people that are still there that it's not that we are heartless mindless organization. We want to look after people. And so it could be that the development is then amped up because you want to look after the people that remain in the organization. So sometimes it's about moving the bar up, capabilities, and sometimes it's about other things which are not as obvious. At the more senior levels, for example, with an exco team, it's quite often the case that the sponsor or the leader of the exco team feels that people are just not getting on, or they're not getting on well enough, or they don't know each other, they haven't had a chance to get to know each other. So some kind of learning intervention is often a good way to accelerate that process, because they have then a shared experience that can be a little bit of a challenge, but enough to help them to coalesce, so the motivations are other than that. Okay, so well done. That was terrific. You all pass. Yes, thank you. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm just going to go back a step here. And I just want to share this with you, and then I'm going to hand over to San-Ullah, if that's all right, San-Ullah. So if we want to do the numbers version, the equivalent, the ROI percentage equivalent would look like that. Beautiful. Which is roughly, you see, that's this. It causes groans of delight from our numerate colleagues. So it's very straightforward, really, in the first blush, right? Which is to say, it is simply, the measurement is simply, the business case is simply, what is the benefit relative to the cost? And is that number plus or minus? Because if it's a plus, it implies that the numerator, which is the net benefits, is higher than what it costs us to do. There's a couple of things that happen here that can go wrong, but for the most part, it literally is as simple as that. So now the question is, can we translate it into language we can understand? The starting point is to say, okay, well, we have an L&D budget. We're going to spend X amount of money on our people over a budget horizon. If that's all you've got, then that's what you will do, okay? And that's perfectly fine. But in fact, the truth is that there's a lot more outside of that, and I'll show you in a moment what that looks like if we have time. But things like taking people out of the business, what does that cost? What's the opportunity cost of that? So when they're not actually facing clients, what they're sitting in a classroom, or they're on a submersion somewhere, or etc. What immersion? Listen, I'm in good company. I heard my colleague say suppository instead of repository the other day. So I banked that for this very moment. So there's costs outside of there, like a venue, a venue, the transport, the travel, and then the time away from work. And by the way, the more you think about it, the more you could actually be very sensible about what the real total cost is of an intervention. And it is sometimes an astonishing amount of money. And sometimes people use it as a lever to divest from people development. They attribute costs that are part of an overhead which would be sunk otherwise, but use it as ammunition to say, you see, this stuff can't be worth it, So if you are the proponent, you've got to be wise to those things. And by the way, if you ever struggle, just phone me, I'll help you. And then as far as the benefits, so we do this, I think we do this pretty well. Most people are very aware of the cost side. And just by the way, the cost on its own implies that we increase or we decrease the profit of the business because we're only looking at one side of this equation. So we're saying that this development money is taking away from the profits the business would otherwise make. If that's where you stop, then of course this is never going to work, because you're reliant then on goodwill from senior management to make it fly. And goodwill on its own is just not enough, because it's too important an element of our daily lives and of your staff's daily lives. So I've picked 3 examples here. So worker motivation. Do you have, where's Kerry? So Kerry, in collaboration with another one of our ExCo colleagues, has an internal net promoter score which it's what we call a pulse survey, which lots of people use, something similar, to measure where people are, to try and get an understanding of, are people comfortable in their jobs? Do they find them sufficiently challenging? Is the mundane parts of their job getting them down? Et cetera, et cetera. So worker motivation. Does the development intervention improve motivation? Just as a matter of interest, for many years, by which I mean probably 14 years, I think, I worked with a logistics company that are headquartered in Switzerland. And in the first couple of years, we did a program that they called L3, Leadership 3. So it started 1, 2, 3, and then 4 was the board. And so it was a very senior program. And when we started in the room, and that's why I asked you the question about the culture inside of learning interventions versus in the organization. When we started that program, there was a reasonable level of hostility in the room. And I know because I was one of the faculty that was delivering for these guys. And so it was very, you'd say something and the look on their faces was, prove it. Like that. So very adversarial. And I'll say a word later if we get a chance about a learning contract, because I think you can deal with what I've just described through something like that. But that mindset changed over the years because the internal ambassador roles of people who'd been on these programs started to feed into the organization. So that by the time we got within sort of 3 or 4 years, by the time we got to a reasonable amount of momentum, the number of programs were starting to grow, and the number of people on waiting lists to get onto the programs was starting to become a problem for the organization. And the reason was that the people that advocated for the program were so enthusiastic internally. It was completely intrinsic, nothing to do with us. We hadn't tried to sort of recruit people to the cause and say you need to go out there and be a big, So it's, and I think that's part of the conversation, is whether or not as an organization you can sort of light the fuse and just let it go, and people start, in other words, it becomes, instead of you having to justify your existence and the amount of spend you have, the demand from the organization becomes the driving force, because you have line managers phoning up going, it's unacceptable that Mujahid couldn't get onto one of these programs. That's stuck. I'm sorry, I won't have it. You need to find him a place. We've agreed. We told him last year this was, So the motivation thing can be intrinsic, and it can be actually fired from inside the organization, depending on how you interact with it. Something like customer satisfaction, net promoter score is an obvious kind of measure. If you look at logistics, like the example I've just given, for them they might say, or if you're in retail and you're doing online retail, maybe it's the number of shipments, maybe that's a measure. So all of these so-called net benefits are things that I say, certainly historically, although what I hear from Bronwyn makes me think, okay, maybe people are onto it, is that historically it used to be that we didn't do this part of the equation. We didn't work out what the benefits were and how we should measure it inside of our organization. And by the way, you see it says net benefits, because you've got to work out what contribution the program makes as opposed to anything else, and there is a way to do that as well. Right, so on that happy note, I'll hand over to San-Ullah, if that's all right, buddy.
Are you sure you don't want to continue speaking? Because you look very happy. Okay, next.
That's like code for Chris. Can you just... There's the clicker.
Okay, so thank you very much to SBS for having me. And let me start out by being a little bit controversial. So for me, meeting everyone here and going to say hello and that kind of thing is to say, who here thinks that in our budget cycles, because almost all of us is in budget cycles now, that we should cut the spend on learning and development? Raise your hand. So, all of us is on the same page. If I asked you, who of your CEOs or the people that Chris spoke about that makes the decisions on the budgets would say that the macroeconomic factors in the world at the moment is that we are faced with a myriad of wars. We don't have food. Our people are actually struggling to put eggs now cost 58 rand for 6. And things are really tough. And if things are tough everywhere, we have to cut budgets, right? So those people who make those decisions, should they not be here? Are those not the people that should be here and listening to this fantastic speaker, Mr. Chris, to actually almost change the mindsets? Because what actually happens is marketing spend and learnership and developments and all other moratoriums on new placements is now enforced because budgets need to be cut and we need to focus on profitability and growth. And I know that we've got retail and we've got finance and we've got government. And so the reality of the world is that we are in a cost crunch environment. However, in order for all of our businesses to progress, we need people. And so in Sanlam's case, we talk about a whole range of philosophies, etc. And my slide presentation was a lot longer, and Chris said no, he wants to talk more. So I only have 4 slides.
True story.
But the big emphasis for me is it return on investment or return on expectation? And the way that I kind of want to see it is there's 2 levels of expectations. We kind of focused on the expectation of business and what business expects of us in the room to generate for our staff. But what about the other way around? What about the expectations of our staff? In terms of, don't all of us want to improve our CVs? Don't all of us want to have SBS? I attended the senior management course or junior management course and it's on my CV and I'd like to progress my development. And all of us sitting in the room is ambitious. So what stops all of our staff that's in call centers to also be ambitious and move up the corporate ladder, etc. So the people that should be in the room is not in the room. So that's my first kind of start to the controversial discussion. I've always been a proponent of studies and learnership and development because we all come from different backgrounds, and the reality is we all want something that's better for us and our children, right? And the environments and the communities from which we come. So that's kind of the premise, the innate premise, right? And we find jobs, and within our jobs we kind of traverse the corporate world and find our place in the sun. But what is it that's going to move the needle? What is it that's going to make sure that we are relevant today and that we are fit for the future? And how is it that we know that we've moved? How is it that we will measure what has moved? Do we have the right data? So in all of our organizations that we are here, the most important equity piece that we have is data. Everything is about data. TFG, all of you want to know what is the data, what is our staff, how many people's gone on training, and a myriad of other questions, right? So the reality is it's about making sure that we can have the right information to support the conversations with the powers that be. So in Sumaya's case at Woolworths, she's got Hubert there, and Hubert is a great proponent of learnerships and development as your chairman. And the reality is it's different in different organizations. So I'm very fortunate in Sanlam, our group CEO is very much a guy that is supportive of learnerships and developments. So fortunately, my budget meeting as of yesterday, they did not say that they're going to catch the learnership and development budget. They spoke about marketing and that people. So for me, that is quite important, right? And how do you get the senior leadership on board? The way that I think it works is to make them sponsors of programs that really matter. So USB programs, programs that you bespoke for your staff or your organization. So we've got a program called Women on the Rise, and it's about taking sort of your top 20, 30 women in the organization. And I believe that our next CEO should come out of that pool, right? And who best to make the sponsor of that? Your group CEO. Because how else is he going to see that Trish is the next best thing and Claire and everyone else. So the reality is it's about exposure. We're so busy in our daily grind that it's almost hard to notice the next talent, and it's all about talent management. So we've gone through a few iterations on how this can work, and maybe I'll kind of share with you sort of just a broad overview on the Sanlam picture. But we've got our business strategy, and our business strategy is all about becoming the most admired financial services group in Africa.
Sorry, San-Ullah, can I just check? Can you guys see? Okay. If
You've asked that question 13,000 times.
Yes, no, I'm worried. I'm worried about your eyesight. The font's getting smaller and smaller.
Okay. And the big thing is that as human capital, we need to support that strategy. You can have the cleverest people sitting in a room in a Bosparad somewhere, and at the end of the day, if it's not the people that's going to make it happen, it's never going to happen. So the human capital vision is to help Sanlam to win in the marketplace by enabling people and teams to become exceptional and creating a great place to work. And that's my philosophy. Sanlam must be a great place to work. You must, on a Sunday night, you must be excited to get up and go to work. And going to work doesn't mean to get in a car and drive to Bellville or a town or Parow. It means that you're going to log on and you're going to do your work. So it could be hybrid, it could be flexible, it could be actually getting in the car, but that you're actually an ambassador. So for me, so I'm in the group in January, it will be 19 years. And I'm a lawyer by profession. I previously was the group company secretary for Santam for 7 years and for Sanlam for 11 years. So I've kind of sat around the table, right? So it was very nice to sit around the table and listen to other people talk about these things. But you kind of know the history and you know what kind of culture Sanlam is and where Sanlam wants to be, and you have the conceptions of, it is in Bellville and Afrikaans and, where are we going to and what's the demographics and all of that kind of thing. But we want to change that. So we want to change it and we want to make it a home for everybody. So if I told you, standing right here now, that there's people from Amazon and WhatsApp and Takealot and all these big digital companies, and they're all sending their CVs to the small little blue company on the tip of Africa, and they all want to come and work for Sanlam. Would you believe me? Right? And the truth is that we are attracting that kind of talent, and the reason for that is we want to portray and show that we are home for everyone and that we can accommodate people from all across the globe. And what we've done, and where this learnership L&D comes from, is that it's a key focus area for us. So we've got talent, we talk about culture, organizational effectiveness, and most importantly, we've got people development there. And all of this culminates in creating a digital environment. So we had the COVID experiences and everybody's digitizing, and you can go on your app on your cell phone and you can put in your leave and you can check your pay slips and you can do all kinds of things. And I think all of us sitting here, we can possibly do that because our organizations have done it. But it's about the how, and it's the execution, and it's about taking people along the journey and being transparent. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that we do that in a succinct way. So maybe sort of ask the question, why do we develop our people? I mean, all of us, do I need to ask that question here? Because all of us believe why we need to develop our people. The big thing for me is it's about communication, and it's about being transparent and about being authentic, right? So it's about taking our staff along the journey and making sure that we are there for them. If we show that we are there for them and that we care for them, they will all want to ensure that they progress through the organization. But how do you progress if your qualifications is not exactly up to speed? We develop people, and you spoke about training, and we all speak about training, but isn't it great that we can grow our own timber? We always talk about growing our own timber, but does it really happen? I mean, every time you speak to people and it's about, we can't actually make that move because there's always 5 extra reasons why we can't make the move, as opposed to believing why we can make the move. So it's kind of a 80-20 principle. If the person is almost there, make the move and put the person in and give them the support so that they can grow. I mean, the Sanlam that there was 15 years ago and the Sanlam that is there today, it's chalk and cheese, right? If you look at our Group Exco, it's pretty much transformed, big geographical split. If you look at the Sanlam board, it's massively transformed, but not only from a people demographic perspective, but also from a skill set perspective, from a global thinking perspective. Who would have thought that Sanlam has done the biggest deal on the African continent with Allianz, and we own 60% and they own 40%. It's mind-boggling, right? We now operate in almost 30 countries on the African continent, and it's about providing consistent communication and transparency to all our stakeholders, and that's where it comes from. So making sure that talent is a strategic asset for competitive advantage. The idea is that we want to remain competitive. We're always on the back foot, we're always trudging along. Someone's always poaching our staff. If it's not that, our friends in Pinelands. And the reality of it is that it's almost pretty incestuous within our areas. I mean, you guys and Woolworths will probably have the same kind of situation, and myself and Christina, we probably have the same situation. There's lots of blue CV sitting on her desk, lots of green CV sitting on my desk. But it's kind of incestuous, and I have a philosophy, and I started it this year, is that we never had an alumni, right? And Sanlam is a 106-year-old organization. And I say, if you want to go and explore other opportunities, then you must go. But you're always welcome to come back if we have opportunities for you. Let's stay in contact. We have an alumni group. We share information. And if you learn new skills on that side, then come back, right? Come back to Sanlam. Sanlam is home. And as much as it is a 20-odd thousand employee organization, we regard ourselves as a family, right? So it's about the blue family. We talk about the little blue hands. And we try and ensure that that you feel at home, and that's my thing. I want to make sure that all our staff feel at home, and that's really important for me. And then just remember, we've got this other big stick that hangs over us called compliance, the Department of Labor. So yeah, so it's about doing all of those good things. So for me, this really encapsulates a lot of the sort of thinking, and I don't really want to go through this in detail, except to say that this is kind of a stepping stone or a block. And I mean, earlier on we spoke about numbers 1 to 6, and I'm not sure that this is out of kilter with that. The bottom line is there's always business priorities that's important, right? We always have to take into account the business priorities. And when these business priorities is, are we fit for purpose? Do we have the right people? How do we know we have the right people? We have to make sure that the outputs is there. Are we making profitabilities? Is there growth? And it's all of those kinds of questions. Can the person operate in a digital environment? And we need to make sure that someone that's at Sanlam for a long period of time, that they've walked that journey. So there's two kinds of anointed people at Sanlam. The Sanlam bursary holders, they can walk on water. And those people with a 25-year certificate, they can levitate too. So I'm not there, right? So, and that is actually how it is. There's this perception. But so there's a rich history of institutional memory, but we're also struggling with taking that and moving to the next level. So it's about making sure we take our people with on that journey. Those people are, but we've always done it this way, right? We're all in that same space. And if we take people along the journey, we want to make sure that they get to their 50 years. I'm not joking. When I got to Sanlam, Tant Anna was my PA. And I gave Tant Anna her 50th year certificate. Okay? She came there in a school uniform after matric, and she never left. She stayed at Sanlam, right? So that's loyalty. And we like loyalty. We like people to be loyal. But we also like people to be ambitious and to move forward. And how do we do that? It's through learning and development. So on this slide, it's about what are the performance outcomes, our success indicators, our metrics, our learning objectives, our curriculum, and how we kind of do it. This kind of sort of slide encapsulates a lot of how we actually do things, what is important And again, it's about return on expectation. Expectation from the staff and expectation from the organization. And I really like the fact that we have a leader that supports us. And he's a sponsor of many of the programs, and many of the EXCO members are also sponsors of other programs. Now, if they're part of the journey, they took up for us. They're not going to cut our budgets, right? So it's quite a nice way to have a win-win situation. I like this slide, right? It kind of encapsulates what we do at Sanlam, and I'm almost sure to almost everybody here, it's the enterprise value equation for learning and development. We kind of talk about stakeholder priorities and concerns, and these are some of the issues that we talk about. It's about retention of talent, key talent. We talk about what is our future ways of work, how is it going to look. None of us sitting here 3 years ago thought that we're going to have hybrid and we're going to have hot desks and a locker to put our bags in. So the world has changed. What are our value enablers? And that's all the L&D, technology, product designs, and the brand around it. I mean, I think it's so important to associate with a reputable brand. So in order to justify my existence, SPS is a reputable brand, and we will continue working with him. So the truth of the matter is that we want to make sure that the learning and development we give to our staff, that they must be proud of it, right? So I'm not allowed to mention some of the other places, but we do use other places as well. And the reality is, as you kind of climb the tier, you kind of are hungry to do something else, depending on how ambitious you are, and you want to have continuous learning and development. Then we kind of go into the multi-stakeholder impacts, which is about improved employee performance. It's about personal and professional growth. And then we go into the return to the organization, which is improved skills, attracting and retaining talent, employee engagement. And it's all the things that we've kind of spoken about. I think in your groups, almost all of these points have been touched. But we come to the middle story, which is the value story. And all of us have values, and the Sanlam values is integrity, care, collaboration, and innovation, right? That's the values that we encapsulate. And how do we test that? How do we measure that? So we do a thing called the Barrett Culture Scorecard. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of a group-wide survey, and it gets done on an annual basis. We've done it for 4 years, and you can kind of check what is your current culture, your desired culture, what are your potentially limiting factors, and it breaks it down into the various business units, and we can kind of extrapolate quite a lot of data. So for me, this kind of stakeholder domain really encapsulates how we kind of see the Sanlam story. And then this is kind of some of the courses that we do with USB, and it's really worked very well for Sanlam. I mean, we've had this relationship with these courses for over 20 years, which is your senior management, middle management, junior management courses. And you won't believe how important it is for staff to say, I've done this. I've moved from junior to middle to senior, and it is a great achievement for staff. And once they've gone through it and you can feel it, they know that they are valued as staff members, and we value them because it is a commitment from staff to do this. They have to do their day job and everything else that happens on the side, and then we kind of go into some extra studies. So that is quite important. And sort of over the last 5 years, 600 leaders would have gone through these programs. So these are kind of almost bespoke based on many discussions that we've had. And the reality is that this is what actually works for us in this particular point. I think this is your slide, Chris, but maybe just to sort of talk about, some practical situations, right? So at the core, what is it that we do? We sell policies, right? You sell clothes and home furniture, and so we sell a policy, which is a promise. We promise you that if something happens in the future, we will be there for you. And what is that all about? It's about trust, and it's about integrity, and it's about having an organization that will take you along to make sure that when it's crunch time, we'll be there, right? And in an organization like that, and where you have diversified financial services, you have to ensure that integrity is always there. And it's always about how is it that we can ensure that we are as authentic as possible. And I think that words come up previously. The truth of the matter, in today's day and age, I think staff members is very different to what they were previously. They ask for things, they want things. People are ambitious. They want to know that they're in an environment where they are cared for. And that's what we want to do. We want to kind of grow this caring organization, and we take into account the expectations of staff members and the expectations of the organization. And where do we find the happy balance? That's kind of where it is. But it's a journey, and I think we're all on the journey. And I think we all need to carry this message to our seniors to make sure that they make sure that we continue with the learnership and development, because without staff and educated staff, I don't think we can chase those profit targets and growth targets, and kind of where we're at.
Awesome. Questions or observations? Please, John.
I just want to ask a question. So how do you actually talk to the, let's call it the board guys, who's actually just cutting your training budget the whole time in circumstances like this now?
Yeah. So
is there one that you can, what do you do?
I do think it's the mindset of those guys, right? If they've gone through those experiences and they know that there is value in training people, they would appreciate it. So a lot of the time, the leaders that make the calls are people that's gone through the courses. So somewhere in their career journey, they've either done a management development course, or they've gone to these international universities, and they've done it, and they've trained, and they've applied what they've learned in various MBA courses that they probably do in the organization. It is a difficult conversation to have. I think the realities of the world that we live in is that it is a cost crunch. We're trying to drive efficiencies. I think we also mustn't be fooled by the fact that artificial intelligence is here. We have to adopt digital transformation. And within the human capital space, the first thing people ask is, am I going to lose my job? And those are the realities that we faced with. When you have to go to the board or to the exco and you have to ask them for training budgets, etc., for me, the answer is we don't have to put people on planes and send them somewhere. We can do things online. It's not going to cost us in disbursements. We'll pay for the course fees, but we are saving what we did 5 years ago, as an example. I was quite surprised at My Way. My Way is one of our subsidiaries, and they use bots, right? So by the time you call in and you speak, but after having like a 5-minute conversation, it's actually a bot. The bots can recognize your accent and deal with quite a few questions that you have until such time that you have to sell a product and it goes to a person. So do you invest in technology and take the people that's been in those environments and move them elsewhere? And I think that's what they've done at My Way. And I think that's really great if you can show we are digitizing and we're using artificial intelligence within our organization. But the fact that you've been skilled in a certain area doesn't mean that you can't be reskilled and moved into a different area of the business. And that's what we've done. And you have to kind of show the business case. That's how it works. So you have to spend money in order to save money. That's how it works. Anything else? Please ask me more questions. Otherwise, Chris is not going to give me a lift home.
So I guess more of a personal question on your career journey.
Sure.
If you, in turning a profession, you were the company secretary. Oh, sorry. So given your background, how did you move into your current space?
How did I move into my current space? I like people, and I like engaging with people. I think for me, what was important is that for all those years, I've always sat on the Human Resources Committee. As company secretary, you have to deal with all the confidential. When the stuff hits the fan, then you're the one that must deal with it. And I've built up a relationship with my HR committee chairperson and board members, and I didn't get the position because I had a few connections. I had to really sing for my supper. But I think having a legal degree for me was quite beneficial because I think it's you can use it as a base for pretty much anything other than in your job with finances and numbers. Lawyers are not good at that. So the reality is that the transition was pretty seamless because I've got a relationship within the organization. But it's been a very steep learning curve. I'm in the job for 10 months. I'm still here. So that's a good sign. They haven't fired me yet. I enjoy it. I really, really enjoy it. It's fascinating, and I was told, was it last week or the week? Don't think like a lawyer. Think like an HR person. I'm saying, okay, I'm going to think. It's like, who's spoken about the touchy-feely stuff? I'm do the touchy-feely stuff. So yeah, so it is an adaptation, but it's something that I'm getting used to, and I quite enjoy it. But just remember, a lot of the HR stuff is also legal, like all the labor relations stuff and the ER stuff, and so it does help me. I'm enjoying it thoroughly, and I'm learning lots. I'm meeting new people. I used to have a lot of legal, governance, compliance people, and now I have all the HR and learnership and developments and organizational effectiveness type people that I'm now networking with. So yeah, so it's a fun journey. It's a fun journey. And Sanlam is a great place to work for. I'm just saying.
Won't you say a word about your? So I was very grateful to be invited by San-Ullah to the sort of Human Capital Summit. Let me put words in his mouth, but it was a conference that was hosted down here, and there were a lot of amazing things that happened. I wonder if you can just maybe say a word or two about what happened there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Chris. So we have a human capital conference, and it's made up of all the human capital staff within the organization. So it's roughly about 400 people. It's all the learnership and development, the talent management forums, the organizational effectiveness forums, and it's literally the one time that almost everybody gets together in a room and you kind of meet and you say, oh, Sumaya, I haven't seen you. I always talk to you on the emails, or Christina, we've never really met, and it's great. But the great thing now is that we have human capital staff from all over Africa. And in times of COVID, etc., people never really got to see each other. And here we could all come together. It was here in this building. And we all sat and we spoke about a range of topics. And it's what's topical, what's new, how do we ensure that we future fit as a human capital team. And we spoke about a range of things. I mean, neurodiversity is such a big thing, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We touched on elements of artificial intelligence and digitization and what's new, and apps and generative AI, and how do we take that into the human capital space. So you start to plant the seeds within everyone's minds so that they know what is coming. And if you go through the human capital strategy, we want to ensure that all our human capital staff members is in the loop on what our group strategy is. So you an HR person, you sitting in the sticks and you managing training, and you just make sure call center people gets trained. You don't actually know that we've done all these other great transactions and that this is what the group CEO is planning to do. And we were fortunate to have quite a few EXCO members that also came to the conference so that they can share their trajectory on how the organization is going. And you come out of there and everybody's excited and psyched up, and it just gives you that new lease on life. I mean, we're in the budget cycle and everybody said, are we still having the human capital conference? So we might not be giving fancy little gifts or whatever, but we will get together. And I think it's about getting together. I think people want to meet, people want to engage with each other, and it's human nature to do that. So long may it last. But it was a great conference. I learned a lot, and we had some good guest speakers. I must say this whole issue of neurodiversity is really a big thing. We also spoke a lot on mental health and mental wellness. I think that really is a reality for us in human capital on a global basis. And we all need to be sensitive to a lot of these things. Learnerships and developments, we spoke a lot about that as well. And then about reward, about how do we make Sanlam a great place to be? What is the great thing? We gave people puzzles and how they put it together and what it meant, and there was just so much engagement of staff members, and they were so appreciative of getting together that those relationships are now entrenched. And now until they meet each other the next time, or they might meet each other on business trips. Now, how many of us go to our other branches or departments and we go straight into a room and we sit there and we do a meeting and we come out of there, get in our cars and we go back? But now they go and find Mujahid and they say, look, let me just go and say hello to Mujahid. And that's such a nice thing, and you get good positive feedback. And that's what we liked. That was really great. And then we could invite key stakeholders so that they could see what is our trajectory. We're not shy to share it.
San-Ullah, as a company operating in the insurance and financial services sector, you'll obviously do a lot of environmental scanning and you'll get, gathering market intelligence.
Sure.
So if we open up the newspapers daily, we hear about this skills exodus.
Yes.
And obviously that ties in quite closely with your L&D and your people development agenda. So are the media bodies feeding the trolls with the headlines? Is it real? Are you experiencing it in Sanlam? And what is your actual plans going forward to address that? And I suppose that also speaks to the colleagues in the room as well. Because if it is real, then we in trouble in the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years' time.
Yeah, very good question. And I think it's almost top of mind for all of us. We spoke about the realities of the world. We spoke about macroeconomic factors, but we also have socio-political factors within our own country that we're all grappling with. So from our perspective, we do not want to lose key skills. The truth of the matter is, people do think it is much better to stay across the waters in a small little apartment and use the tube. Okay, but it's not liquor. Okay, it's not liquor to go there. I'm just examining it. Okay, but if you do think it's liquor to go there, then and you a key skill that we do not want to lose, we are putting in place structures that we can accommodate staff like that. So if we can accommodate staff coming from Amazon and from Silicon Valley coming to this little place called Cape Town on the tip of Africa, surely we can accommodate Mujahid that's going over that side, but keeping within the organization. So we're looking at various options to ensure that we continue to employ key skills that we do not want to lose in foreign jurisdictions and make sure that they continue to work for Sanlam. With virtual, it's not a difficult thing. Obviously, we wouldn't like for people to move without, well, not to move, if we can accommodate them within the time zones, then that's obviously beneficial, right? Because having meetings and Teams and Zooms and that, it's quite important. So we want to continue doing that, and we are doing that. So if people want to move and they see that that they want to continue working for Sanlam, we're trying to make a plan for those. But that's work in progress, and I'm almost sure many organizations are also trying to do that as well.
How do you mitigate the cost of living challenges in other countries versus South Africa? I mean, we all have a salary band.
Yeah.
And how do you manage that?
I think, Samaya, that's a valid question, right? So just remember, if we need to replace you in Sanlam and we want to retain your skills, we're currently paying you at a certain level. But if we have to replace you, it's probably going to cost a lot more. And if it means that we have those conversations with staff members, we will have those conversations. At the moment, we do have quite a lot of staff members that's asking for it. In terms of, my spouse or my partner, they've got a job in the Netherlands and they want to go overseas and I really don't want to leave Sanlam. Can we accommodate you? And those are conversations. So Are you happy to continue working for Sanlam at your current salary, but you keep your family together in a different jurisdiction? It's personal circumstances versus organizational requirements. So it's again the managing the expectations. If it can work, it can work. If it can't work, we'll have to say bye to Samaya. So
yeah, Jared, questions? So as
Based on this conversation, we spoke a lot about return on investment, kind of looking at the skills gap and kind of looking at what the organization. But as we look at the environment, we're kind of digitizing a lot. We're changing these different skills. And if we look at a behavioral aspect, people are more interested in what's out there nowadays. If you think of like younger people, it's all about tech. I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm not interested in so much older skills, as we would put it. So from Sanlam's perspective, your perspective, how do you think that does that impact L&D professionals to kind of when they think about programs to select or skills that they want to develop within organization? For example, in AI, with especially in cognitive skills, people think differently. Is that something that we should consider in L&D, and what do you think are some of those skills that we should think about?
So thanks, Mujahid. So yes, we do sell policies, but we do a lot of other things as well, right? So, so we've started a new group cluster called Sanlam FinTech, okay? And that's like next level thinking, the next wave of business. And it's taking insurance financial services to the next level, right? And that has created a lot of excitement in the group. A lot of people that worked in traditional sort of business units are saying, Sanlam FinTech, that's lekker to be there. I really want to kind of work in that environment where it is very progressive, and I think that my skills need to be honed in order to justify that I can potentially have a position on that side. So within the group, we're creating pockets of excellence that focus on digital. And if there are staff members that would like to traverse that, as opposed to bringing people in from the outside, we would definitely want to look at people on the inside. And then where the skill set comes in and the learnership and developments is that we're definitely taking people on that AI journey to make sure that they are upskilled within financial services and that they could then plug the holes in some of those new digital businesses that's coming out. So Sanlam FinTech is almost like a holding entity for a myriad of new different ways of doing business within insurance financial services. So we're trying to do that. Yeah, there's a lot happening at the moment.
Okay.
Can I ask one last question?
Yeah, sure.
So say for instance, you take a strategic view towards learning and development.
Yeah.
The 2050 version.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that and how your personnel would look and how the learning models would look and how would you adjust within the company? You talk about the AIs and so forth.
Yeah.
It's a vibrant environment, but how are you going to stay agile even with that in mind?
So it's a very valid question, and we grapple with that all the time. I think there's a place for everybody and every way of doing business within the South African environment. And we're very fortunate that we have a regulatory and sort of competition commission environment that allows this kind of business development. To kind of give you an example, we grappled with that 15 years ago. Let's use Santam as an example, right? So Santam is a broker business in short-term insurance, and you have a broker and they come and sit with you and I got these cars and this household and my TV and my ring, I'm insured and all of that. And you talk to your broker. So there's people that like that, okay? There's people that want to do that. But there's also people that don't have time to sit with a broker and they just want to go online and do their thing. And that's how my way got established, right? So we kind of, in a very simple way, I'm explaining to you how we kind of diversified the business from a broker model to a digital type model. And in 50 years' time, it's going to be the same. It's about what is your client's expectation. In 50 years' time, we're still going to have clients that want to see a consultant, a broker, an advisor. However, there's going to be more people that are digital natives that would want to do things online and would want to engage with businesses in a way that's more digitally focused. And I think as as business traverses and our world evolves, people will find ways to make that happen. So we definitely look at that all the time, and it's something that's top of mind. But to answer your question, it's going to be a different world in 2050, right? And you're going to have people that's going to be doing things a lot different. I mean, as it stands right now, I mean, you speak to these futurists, and I mean, they like scare the living shit out of you because you're like, you know, I'm going to go to work I'm going to be teleported to work and all of that. But it's not the truth, right? It's like, okay, I'm like waiting instead of sitting in the traffic for 2 hours this morning. The reality is we are all people, we are all human, and we all like to do things differently. So some people will continue to use traditional methods of doing business, and there will be place for that. And there's people that move to the digital space. So to give you an example, we've got a business called Sanlam Connect, and they have a training academy. And they train their advisors on the new phase regulations and all the exciting things that Christina does. The retention rate on that training is like in the 80s or 90s, because that business is focused on seeing people face to face, right? And it hasn't died down, like not in the last 20 years, right? People still go on those courses, like continuously, continuous education, upskilling, and sign those forms. And they continuously see their clients. They make money that way. That's how they make money. But the client base hasn't changed in that segment of the market. But in other segments of the market, you have digital enablement, that business is growing. But within the organization, there's definitely a shift. You know, you kind of see the shifts, but I was telling Chris, but it still remains blue money. So some clients might move, but we want them to remain within the Sanlam stable. So we're trying to be all things to everybody. We can't do it successfully all the time, but so long as the money stays within Sanlam, that's important.
Lekker, right. Thank you very much, San-Ullah.
Thank you.
So, colleagues, just to say, let me just see if I can. I just wanted to put some of these things are sort of resources that you could use if you are the kind of person who likes to read. Let me caution you that some of them are excruciatingly hard work. And trust me, I'm a voracious reader, so coming from me, that's a warning that should be well heeded. But there's one or two here. So for example, this book here was a book I came across when I first started working in executive development, written by a guy called Keith Patching, who's long retired. And in that book, he spoke about the value, for example, of whether or not you want applied learning. In other words, you stay in the workplace and someone looks over your shoulder and works with you through a process, for example, versus more abstract learning. So you sit in a classroom and you learn about the world and you broaden your horizons, and it's a bit mystical compared to your working environment. And the question is, where's the right place to be between those two positions? So learning that's very sort of, tomorrow morning I could go and sit in front of my computer and I can make a difference, versus things that make me change the way I think, so that I look at the broader perspective as being part of the system that I'm dealing with, rather than just the optimization of a subset of what goes on in an organization. So that is a book I highly recommend if you can get your hands on it. They are not easily found these days. The other thing I wanted to say just before I thank San-Ullah is to say that, you know, the golden opportunity happens sometimes in ways you don't see coming. And if I go back to the colleagues I mentioned earlier that we worked with in Switzerland, one of the divisions of that business was the now much maligned oil and gas division. And one of the guys that was on that program did the program with us, and he imposed himself on the cohort that followed in the year that came next. And he arrived and he said, I need to talk to this class before you guys get going. And they had done a project using the tools and techniques that were deployed in the previous year. And he told us the numbers of the impact on their top and bottom line as a division of those tools and techniques, and their change in the way they thought and the change in their behaviors as a result of the program that had run. And fortunately for me, there was a gentleman sitting in the room who would have been in San-Ullah's shoes, the equivalent of that organization's also 40,000 odd people. And so he was there and listening, and he had been on our case about how do we know what the return on learning is. And this guy, his name was Christian, I'll never forget, I still see it in my happy dreams, said that the numbers that he quoted, basically the head of human capital said to me at lunch afterwards, the numbers he's citing in terms of the profits we made as a result would have paid for all of our development across the entire organization for the entire year. That one project. The project had started in the room with us the year before. So what he had done is he'd recruited a couple of his colleagues from different parts of the organization. They'd conceptualized this idea, and they had translated that project into something that Christian then took on and drove with. And by the way, I've trotted this story out so many times because it is such an inspiring thing for me. I kind of figure if there's just one or two projects that emerge out of these conversations that happen in the development environment that can be translated, it's like low-hanging fruit. It's nowhere near as difficult as your conversation with your exco or your board, where you have to justify your existence and pray for the bread you're going to be shared, and etc. You know, it's much easier to say, do you realize that we hit a home run because one of those projects translated into a bucket load of money? I say that partly, by the way, also in the knowledge that with some of our clients, we work on what's called business-driven projects. They are challenges that emerge from the organization. They help us line up the comms in the organization. So from our point of view, it might sound a bit Machiavellian, I promise you it's not. But our picture of what happens in a learning environment is that sometimes what you'll do is you'll put people in a room and they are peers in their environment. So they already talk to each other, and for that reason you think it's natural that they should be in the room. But the problems in the organization are nothing to do with the peer layers. They are to do with vertically or sometimes diagonally across different silos and different levels of hierarchy in the organization. How do you join all of that up together? So years ago I worked at a place called Rushlikon, which overlooks the lake in Switzerland, with an outfit called Swiss Re, which our insurance colleagues will know. And we were working with a group of people that were project leads, and the guy who I was with and this bloke, Keith Patching, were in the room, and they asked a question. They were asking questions about what are the challenges that people are facing, and it became evident in the room that actually, let's say it's project management. Their project management tools and techniques are top class. They do it very well. The people who run projects and are project team members are absolutely brilliant. Actually, it turned out that the sponsors of these projects were fickle. Okay, so they flit. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, they, while it's flavor of the month, I'll put my hand up to be the sponsor, and then as the project goes along, they're less and less available, and as it looks like the organization's changing direction, they abandon the team. Now the poor team is doing a project really well, but it's not the right project anymore because it doesn't have the sponsorship it used to have, that kind of idea. So there's so much to think about in this space, and the business projects have the ability to drive the comms and the value up and down in the organization. Also, being a good sponsor is a skill in itself. So in that organization, they realized, actually what we need to do is we need to provide more sponsorship for these projects, make smaller project teams, more sponsorship, so that the learning is also about how do we become good sponsors in the organization, because that's the way we get projects across the line. Yesterday, my colleagues and I that are in the room here with me had most of a day actually of talking about strategic projects that we've been working on. One of which, by the way, was something called Great Place to Work. And the thing that occurred to me listening to our colleagues giving their inputs is people start to understand better what's happening in the organization because they're starting to pull from all these different pieces. How do you measure the value of that? I have no idea. But you do know that there has to be benefits. So some of the stuff we're going to just have to take our hands off the steering wheel and hope it works out okay, you know. So I think there's some very tangible low-hanging fruit, like the Christian example, where there's lots of money to be made. There's other situations where you might as well give up. But in the middle of the road, there is an issue of how do we measure the net benefits as a proportion of the total cost, so we can actually physically make a business case. I've got other slides here. I promise you I won't take you down that route, but where we can become much more technical about how we do what we need to do. And so it is actually a feasible thing. All right, by way of thank you, let me say, just by the way, also, is anyone here from Toyota? No. So we did have a couple of Toyota names outside. I wanted to mention Toyota because they demonstrate the kind of generosity that I attribute to this gentleman. It's a similar sort of thing. We've been working with Toyota for a very long time, and when they get together, when their most senior guys get together, they recall the days when they were doing the MDP on the Belleville campus 20 years ago, which predates my involvement, so I've got take no credit for the good or the bad of it. But it's a generosity of spirit that they then share with their colleagues. When we had a dinner at the Lanzerac about a month ago that they hosted, and Andrew Kirby was there, the CFO was there, the Chief Operating Officer was there, Nigel, who's the head of manufacturing, he was there, and then this big group of people. And when they stand up and talk, they talk about their experience at Stellenbosch Business School all those years ago, in order to encourage people in the room to sort of say, embrace the learning and enjoy it, you know. So my experience with Sanlam has been very similar. I just want to cite 3 quick examples. I mentioned, and I'm not campaigning to be re-invited, San-Ullah, but I mentioned the HR conference that was hosted here. It's not, you know, it's a very generous thing, I think, to invite your vendors to come and join you in an environment like that. And by the way, I sat at that table, and Trish and my other colleagues will tell you that I took notes all day. Literally, there was just one idea after another after another. Not only that, I drove everyone at the table nuts because I had all of their details. They were all vendors from different parts of the world. One guy was from the awards company. So I wanted to learn a little bit about how do they deal with rewarding staff and et cetera and so forth. And there were others. Everybody at that table had something that they did for Sanlam that I thought, oh, that's so cool. We really need to try and understand how that works, et cetera, et cetera. And I made all these notes and then drove my colleagues nuts by sending them all the notes the same evening. So I think that demonstrates a generosity of spirit. When we asked about previous teaching engagement, we approached San-Ullah, and without hesitation he said, absolutely, I'd like to come and join you. When we talked about today, he said he's very happy to come and join us. Just more recently, and in a much more sort of sacrificial sense, I contacted San-Ullah and said, listen, I have a problem with, we are trying to recruit somebody at the moment. It's a very senior role in our organization. If we get it wrong, we're just too small of a business to get it wrong when we're recruiting senior people. It's as simple as that. He said, I have a lady who heads up my industrial psychology unit called Chantal Seiss. I will get her on the phone to you. And literally over the weekend, this was on a Friday, over that weekend, I was back and forth with Chantal so that by Monday morning we could sort out the way that we were going to go forward and what assessments we would do and how it would all work. So as I say, absolutely wonderful partner to work with. So thank you very much, and thanks for today.
No problem. Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much, everyone.